Are you a military service member or veteran struggling with insomnia? A new study is investigating a non-drug therapy program that you can receive from your computer or a smartphone. If you find it difficult to fall or stay asleep or feel tired throughout the day, internet-guided cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia may be a treatment worth exploring. If you or a loved one is a current or former military service member, has had a head injury, and are between the ages of 18 and 64, you might qualify for this study. Call or text 301-456-5474 or head on over to militaryveterandad.com/sleep.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is Military Veteran Dad. I am your host, Ben Cloy, bringing you conversations that help you go from the dad you are today to the dad that you want to be tomorrow. This is episode 156, and today we are speaking with Michael Lee. But before we get into Michael Lee and who he is and why he is here, I got a dad joke for you. When do astronauts eat lunch? At launch time. Get it? Because it's launch, the rocket, and it's lunch time. I know, it's a really bad dad joke, but often those are the best. But let's get to Michael Lee. Michael Lee is the president and chief executive officer of a financial company called Findec and has been employed with the company for an amazing 25 years, all the way to the top of the CEO position. Michael's leadership skills were sharpened through years of serving his country in the reserves. He obtained the rank of major, spending 13 years as a military police officer in the United States Army after graduating from college. He also served 3 years as a civilian law enforcement officer as well. An experienced executive and leader, Michael excels at mentoring people, and I know that came from the military, guiding them through difficult situations. He has a knack for remaining calm, another military trait that often serves us well in the corporate world. He has a kind of clarity during stressful situations that is often hard to come by. He also has a photographic memory, which comes in handy when traveling or unfamiliar places. And the reason why he is here today is because he is passionate about his family and living life to the fullest. Guys, if you want to hear my big takeaway, stay on for the other side. Otherwise, let's get started today with Michael Lee. Today, we are traveling all the way out to California, and I'm talking to Michael Lee, who is part of Findec, who has an amazing idea with connection to personal finance, but also he's a veteran, he's an Army National Guard reservist, and just an amazing story of how far he's come, what he's done. So welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Oh, thank you, Ben, for having me on your show today. I appreciate it.
So a question that I always like to kick off with, when you first started in the military, let's go back to pre-transition before you even go into the military. What were you looking for? Like, as a person, what did you feel like you were missing maybe that the military was going to close up that gap?
Well, so it's kind of when I joined, I have a family history of serving the military. So I grew up, my father was in the military. So I grew up in a traditional military life family that people that have been in the military probably relate to, or you had parents that were, and so very structured life. You know, it was kind of your typical military family growing up with my dad. And one of my brothers ended up joining the Navy out of high school, and he was 3 years older than me. And I very close to him, and he went off and he joined for different reasons, but he really enjoyed it. And like it just became a great thing for him where he was in life. And so fast forward 4 or 5 years from there, it was 2005. So this was just with Afghanistan, Iraq war was going. And I was in college, and I wanted to serve. I actually wanted to serve out of high school. I wanted to join ROTC in college. I definitely wanted to go the active duty, make a career in the military. A lot of it's my father, being around my father. But things changed my senior high school, so I couldn't go that route. So continue on, and then fast forward again to 2005. Here I am on campus. Everybody in the world's recruiting people for the military right now. And I came across a Army captain from active duty that was on campus recruiting. Ended up just talking to him, and about a day later, I found myself in the recruiter's office, looking at going into the Army. And so I don't think I was actually really looking for anything and from the Army, more to just looking to want to, I guess, do my part, but was because the basis of how I was raised. And so I thought it was a good way to do my part. I didn't had no conception of what that was going to be or anything like that. I was single, so it made sense. I was a little older, but I was still single, just growing in my mid-20s. So to me, it was just kind of more of kind of a perfect storm of everything going on around in the world than me just saying I want to join because I want to, like my brother, he joined because that was an option, that was the best option for him at the time. So for me, it was just more about, hey, I want to do this and this is my opportunity now because I couldn't do it when I was a senior. And so I did it. So next thing you know, I was in the Army.
When you were in this time frame, did you feel like you had it? I mean, you probably did because most of us in our 20s do, as I think about leading up to the question here. But did you feel like you were living? Like, did you have a plan or were you kind of just like floating at the time still?
Well, I was definitely living. I was going to school, I was in college, and I was working for Findec at the time. So as a college student, but I didn't know what I want. No, I mean, like you said, I don't think anybody knows what. And now looking
but we
back,
definitely try to sell it.
Yeah, we tried to sell ourselves. Yeah, I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and I got a big master plan. Now looking back 20 years later, I was like, I had no clue what the heck I was doing back then. And so I didn't. I just wanted to. I think I would be honest to say, if probably the wars were not going on, I probably wouldn't have joined, because when I joined, I was older, and I wanted to be a pilot, but I knew that wasn't possible because of vision. So I think I joined just because of certain things. And I know this is going to sound really corny, and a lot of people say this, but it was just my duty at the time of what was going on. But I can say I grew up in a family like that that was kind of expected of you, that you would do your role. And it kind of actually it morphed into something more when I got into the Army. So I kind of think I did it backwards. I kind of found something once I was in that I didn't even really know, even growing up in that kind of environment. Although my dad wasn't actively in the military, was as I was growing up as a kid. But it wasn't until I got into the military and got there, and I was like, oh wow, I really do like this. This is very similar to who I am, these other people, and how I like to do things and structure and all these different things. And so I kind of found a home once I was there, not looking to go find one. Because like I said, you mentioned I was a reservist. So I went in thinking I was only going to do this 1 week in a month, couple weekends.
You fell hook, line, and sinker for the brochure.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting to actually go into it to become active duty. I was expecting to stay with Findec. This was more fulfilling a different kind of side that I wanted to serve and do my role. And I thought it was going to be like 6 years, because that's a contract for reservists coming in for what I was doing. I thought 6 years I'd be done, and 13, 14 years later, you're over halfway to 20. So it was more, once I got in, I found stuff, and it was harder than on the reverse side, because I know we'll probably talk about this coming out, because for me, I got a lot more out of it once I was in than when I was originally going in, or was originally signing up to join the military.
I'm interested to see, because there's a couple different places where I thought about going, but then I just had a thought connect. You essentially work at the same place you did when you joined. So right. You almost had like this constant like pie. It was always 3.14, while the outside world was chaotic, changing, married, kids, life was continuing to grow. Any thoughts connected to from having that constant of one company, that while also everything else is changing on the outside? Did that support it, or did that make it almost difficult because you were maybe tethered to one company while everything else was changing?
Well, it actually made it easier. So being a reserve soldier, where there's a lot more flux, that's for sure. I saw both all sides components of the military, between active duty and reserve side. And reserves, you definitely get pulled more, because you're going, you're coming, you're going, you're coming, you're going, you're coming all the time. And by the time you get in the reserves, when you get somewhere, or you get called up, or you're going to do something, it's time to turn around and go back home. They send you back home because you're done. And so Findec and having that one tethered job at home actually probably made it easier, because that was a constant at home I came back to. So I didn't have to adjust coming back to find a new job. Like many soldiers, many people coming back, when they were bouncing back, they get deployed for a year. They not lose their job, but maybe they obviously had to leave their job, and then they come back, and then they have a lot of unknowns because they got to find a new place or a new job. So for me, it actually made the transitions a little easier because it was constant back at home, where, I had my same job, the same people were there. I had my house there, so I didn't have to give those things up every time I would have to leave. So for me, it made being gone easier and coming back, but it actually made going harder because I was always leaving stuff there. So a lot of people, when they left, they could leave, they could disconnect, or they didn't have much stuff tying them down. So they would leave. For me, I was always felt like I was getting pulled back both ways because I had stuff on both sides, both when I was in serving or I was back at home. So it was good, yet it was harder. I think I have the reverse cycle of it, where I had that stability, which was a great thing, which I loved. But then I felt like I was almost like cheating on my home because I knew I had a lot of responsibility, and it's like, what do I do? Do I keep doing both, or do I have to do one? Because I'm really fulfilled here, but I like it, but I like, so it was challenging because I saw a lot of soldiers, given my positions in the military and stuff, that, a deployment would come up and they would take it in a heartbeat, not even think twice about it. They're like, we're out of here. I'm gone, ready to go. And for me, I had to sometimes think, because I was leaving a lot more. And FinDec was a full-time job, just like when you're in active duty, it's a full-time job. So it was really hard to balance those two aspects of your life and then stay true to yourself and try to fulfill yourself personally and what you want out of it, or what you want out of life. So
What would you say to someone who's having a hard time trying to stay true to themselves while their world stays in flux, either through something similar to yours or just in general, like where someone struggles to connect that?
You have to be honest with yourself. And it came a point, after 13, 14 years, I could have kept on doing it, but I think it came to a point. It's like saying being okay. I think it's being okay with it. I think a lot of times, especially in us in the military, we don't like to quit. We don't like to give up. And I think for a lot of us, when we leave the military, even if we know we're leaving, it still is like that back of your head, like, oh man, I'm leaving my battle buddies, or I'm leaving people, or I should keep doing more. And so I think it's hard to be okay with that, and then come home and try to establish. I know we talked about this before, like establish that new home you have and what that's going to look like, and more than just physically going home, like starting a relationship or starting a new career, because a lot of times you have to start a new career when you come out of the military, and that's hard to do because, it's hard to do because I see it on my civilian side, being on both sides of the spectrum. It's hard enough. And on FinDec, when we hire somebody that's in maybe their 30s and 40s that come to work for us, that's hard to change careers at that point in your life because you've done something for so long. So it's hard to expect veterans all of a sudden at mid 40s to come home and then say, okay, time to learn a whole way new life now at 40 some years old. And it's just going to probably be the exact opposite of your military life, because not much in civilian worlds like the military life. So I think you first have to kind of find out first, be okay with that process, that's going to happen. And that because I see a lot of times people will come home and then they want to go back in, or they'll go work for the government on the civilian side because it's still similar to the military, but you can be a civilian, so have a little more stability, not so much of the military coming and going type aspect. So, but then again, are they really, I know you and I talked about this, are they really coming home and, changing, or are they just coming home and kind of finding an alternative world that's still similar? So I'm home, I'm doing air quotes for the people that are listening.
They're still hiding or running from something is what kind of words come to mind.
You're home in air quotes, but you're really not, because you just kind of found another aspect of the military type life through the civilian type contracting type of life. Because I have a lot of friends that have gone the contracting route after the military, and I'm like, you guys are still doing it. You haven't come home yet, and their families are wondering if it's a very common tale.
And there's probably something else that goes with that, is you can still use some of the same military excuses of, oh, they need me to do something, or it's going to be a late night. And I think, like, as an active duty dad, or even anytime you're connected to the military service, there's that easy out of, oh, my unit needs me to do something. And most people won't call you out, and they're just going to assume that you need to do that. But when you don't have that, like, absolute commitment from, like, someone giving you an order, there's a lot of easy carryover where you could hide under that same language of, oh, I gotta be here, or even just lie to yourself. Maybe no one's telling you to be there, and that's what you just told yourself that you need to be there because you're still hiding from that. So I could easily see how that plays in that too as well.
Oh yeah, sure. And I have a good. I know you said about stories, and I have a very recent story. I know it's two people. Let's say I know two people, and they've started dating, and I end up meeting the people. The male is the one that was in the military for a very long time, and now they're not, and they're in contracting. And I want to say I love both these people, but I think this is a great story for us in the military of how we struggle, and then people that end up meeting military veterans, right? And they don't understand the dynamics of what we're kind of talking about right now, because I think just as much as veterans need to know how to navigate this, so does the civilian world, because it takes people to understand how to navigate it for them, what the pull is, what's that lure that keeps us sometimes looking in that past, or how do we let it go. And so I ended up meeting the person, and they're a contractor. And I remember after meeting them, and I came home and talking to my wife, I said, that's going to be a tough relationship, because I could tell already, that the military life is their life, and that it's never going to change. And so it's going to be really hard for them to have a relationship, because he hasn't come home yet. He hasn't embraced that new home life yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is not a negative. It's just the way of what happens. And fast forward, that's what kind of happened. And that pull is always it's like you just said, Ben, well, I got to go work extra hours, or I got to stay late. And so then you end up, you're just dating somebody in the military. And then for the military person, they're struggling with that balance, right? That how do you come home and, say, okay, I'm done with that part of my life. But I remember talking to this person, great person. They love that life. They love being at, his contracting jobs out in the field. He loves being out in the field. That's just, so it's like you said, how do you balance it? How do you not get pulled back?
What I hear in that is, so one thing that I've learned through over 3 years of this podcast is, for those types of people, we join the military to find meaning. And the military is very good at issuing it, and it delivers it every single day. It'll give you that drug and that feeling of meaning. But the problem is, once it's ended, we either self-destruct in trying to find meaning in why did my friends die and I came home, or we try to just find meaning in the work because we don't actually find value in our own life. So we need something else to issue it to us. And there's a crux within that switch, is that we're always trying to find value in our service and create a legacy with our service. But the real switch that most military members aren't doing, and the reason why this podcast exists with family as our legacy at the bottom, is because that's the switch, is when you find meaning in the pursuit of being a dad or caring for your family. That's the switch when you can detach from, doesn't matter what I do, I am still a good dad, I am still who I am. I don't need something from the outside world to make me whole, is a thought that I often coach dads through, because especially if you joined with some type of dysfunction in your life, if you joined from some type of trauma that you were running from, or maybe a dumpster fire of a family or a neighborhood, you're going to keep running until you stop trying to find meaning in the outside world and stop running from what happened early on.
Yeah, my brother is a primary. I know we've spoken before we started this podcast. I had a brother that entered the military for pretty much the stereotypical reason is, that was the only option when he graduated high school. And it worked. It gave him meaning. Like you said, it was like from day one of basic training, he finally had meaning and a purpose. And it took him a while. He served, and he came out, but I know when he came out, it took him a while, but then he found meeting other places that replaced that. And all of a sudden he's like, I was like, he had a good career. He's in the Navy. And I was like, you're good. I was like, yeah, my family, I have meaning now that's not through the military. And because what's interesting is he took his skill sets that he got from the military that gave him meaning and purpose, and figured out where to apply it in the civilian world. And then he realized really the military didn't give him the meaning, the purpose. They just kind of gave him the platform or the training to kind of give you what you like to do. But he realized, I can apply this in the civilian world. He was a rescue swimmer. So he's like, well, I can go do this for civilian law enforcement. They need them. I'm already trained, so it's a slam dunk. And so he went and did that, and then he could be home. And then he started a family, and then he was still doing what he loved, but it was more in his control.
It was balanced. It wasn't.
Balanced.
It was
Correct.
something he did to enhance his life, not to complete his life.
Correct. And I think I even had to figure that out. Things like you said, when I went in, I was a little different. Didn't go in because I didn't have a plan per se, or struggling with school or struggling with other things in life. I went in because I just wanted to serve. But when I got in, I kind of got that drug. And I was like, wow, this is really fun. This is really good. This is really who I am. This is what I should be doing the rest of my life. However, over the 13, 14 years, I obviously, like many people, started a family and started to have, your life while you're serving. And then I realized, my meaning is not the military. That's not who I am. It's just what I do. And so I realized over time, I think this is with dads, especially because you see a lot more right now, you're seeing a lot more men than women. So I had more experiences with men than women in my units. Is the military is who they are, right? This is what I am. And they would have kids at home and all this stuff. And I was like, well, no, but you need to go home to your family. This is going to be here tomorrow. You'll come back tomorrow, but this is not who you are. And so I had to I kind of got really sucked into it a lot more. And then when I was going through these dilemmas, these back and forth, usually it started like probably around year 9 and 10, being in, I was like, wow, it's my daughters, saying, hey, when you're never home and all these kind of things. Like, oh no, I'm home. I'm a dad. But she was old enough to express like, but you're not here. And I think you said that, like, I thought because I physically would come home that I was here and there, but she was saying, you're not here to do these things with me.
And that's like the Leave It to Beaver checkbox. Like, as long as he's sitting on the couch reading the newspaper, waiting for dinner, he's home.
Yeah. And then, so I was like, oh, you're kind of right. And then once I got out of doing the military and then I'm home, I found the new meaning. I found really what I was, his meaning is being me. And it's not somebody else or some organization or some unit, but that's what the military teaches us, right? You're fighting for your unit. You're fighting for
your
country.
The idea of I doesn't exist. So it's like,
no.
So there was something else that I don't know if I've had this thought before, but the military is really good at revealing who we have the potential to be, but it often doesn't like give us the accountability to step into it as our own identity. We still feel like this is a military-esque thing that we're just issued, and that it's not really us. It's just an opportunity we get in this military unit, and it's magic that only happens there. And then the real crux of transition is realizing you are always that person. You will be always that person. You have an opportunity to be that person and step into, because I can imagine as you had more of the military reveal what your potential was, your ability to show up at FinDec was even stronger, because you eventually were able to transition like this isn't something that I can use there. This identity will actually carry over here. And by the way, it's really valuable over here if I can translate it properly and have a deeper impact, even bigger than what you can do in the military.
For sure. It is, because and especially on the reserve side, reserve soldiers it's a really unique, because you'll come into this unit, 200 plus soldiers in my unit, and they're all reserve soldiers. So I have 200 plus soldiers that have full-time careers, electricians, plumbers, civil law enforcement, truck drivers, doctors, you name it. That's what they do full time. And they come in and they make this unit unique, because it's kind of an interesting dynamic on the reserve side, because yes, you're fighting for a large organization. There is no I, but it's all these individuals with these individual skill sets that makes us so great. We just never, in the military, you're just hammered home that it is not I, it's about the team. But in all reality, that's what makes teams great, right? Is all these individuals coming together to bring their skill sets and their knowledge, and you make the organization really great. And I think that's, like you said, Ben, going back to FinDec, is when I came back to FinDec and eventually just got out of the military, everybody would said is you have all these skill sets from the military that we see you applying at FinDec now. That's made the organization better. So I think a lot of military veterans, when dads are coming back, is like, you don't have to give up what you were doing. You don't have to, all you're doing is you're just saying, instead of being gone all the time, I'm going to be home, but you still can get the same fulfillment. You can still do what you did there. You can still be a part of you can go work for an organization where you have that that feeling that you get in the military. It is out there. You just might have to find it a little harder. But I don't think it has to go away. It's just kind of a different evolution of it, I guess. Stealing from the military, something that's like you're evolving into something, but it's still, the baseline is still the same where you're coming from. It's just the environment's different. That's all it is.
You opened up another question, and I've never even considered this just because I was active duty, so I never experienced it until you described it. But I can imagine having that many unique lives coming together and all essentially being labeled as one, and putting a uniform on that all look the same, but they've all seen the world 10 times differently than just like an active duty boot camp unit that comes from all different walks of life, but they haven't really lived life yet. So they're all still kind of just figuring it out yet. I'm wondering, how did that like collection of all those perspectives? Because I'm a big believer, like the one thing that makes transition hard is we don't have a wide enough view of like where we could actually go and what we could do with their life. So I'm wondering, being surrounded with all those different types of people, did that help you even see more freedom financially in your life, even now with the work that you do?
Sure. I mean, because like I said, FinDec was always in my back pocket. So, if I was done with the military, or, I was like, I just can't do this anymore. I knew in the back of my head, I had it out, which is different than active duty. Like you said, you come in active duty, most people come in active duty are 18 years old, and they start 18-year-olds from the day they go to basic, and they could be coming out in the mid 40s, but their whole life's been the military. The reservists on the other side, reservists usually start later. I mean, most reservists come in around 27, 28 years old at basic training, and then they go into reserve time, but they've already started a career or been doing stuff besides the military after 18 years old. So your perspective of the world and what's out there and how you can transition is definitely a lot more easier, I think, for reservists, because we saw a lot been with active duty. So in my reserve units, and I think, again, this is you've been talking about it, is they keep coming back. So a lot of times we would get active duty soldiers that did their contract, usually 4-year contract, and then they would get out and then they didn't know what to really do. So what the easiest solution was, well, I'll go be in a reserve unit then, because then I can still kind of be in, I can still get that feeling of belonging in that.
Like you kick the can down what I want to do when I grow up down the road.
And that was very common. I saw that all the time in reserve units where they come back in, and then they're kind of caught in purgatory, because like then the reserves is kind of just putting a Band-Aid on something where they don't really want to be there, but they don't know to transition out, where to go, what their purpose is, because their whole purpose since 18 years old was the military. And so, but for traditional reservists that come in later on, you don't see that as much, because what do? They'll go back to their company, or they'll go back to their job that is right down the road. Literally some of these soldiers live 10 minutes from their unit, like active duty, but it's still different because it's not an active duty base. It's not in a military housing. You're going back to the world of everybody else, majority of the population. So that transition is a little easier than, say, active duty. And like I said, the very common to see active duty veterans coming out and then coming back into the reserves or the National Guard just to be around that again, because it's hard. And I can't imagine, I never did active duty that way. I only did active duty for deployments and training and such. So I can't imagine what it was like to just be on active duty for 6, 8, 10, 15 years and all of a sudden be like, you're done. Okay. You don't have that at all anymore. What do you do? Where, it's like you said, where is that meaning? Where is that purpose?
And I never had this thought either, but I can imagine it, that if you did do what you just said and went into the reserve routes, there's a moment that hasn't happened yet that will probably happen 3 years down the road when you check in with someone or you see someone that you left the active duty with at the exact same time, killing it and just thriving in what they're doing. You're going to magnify the feeling that you were too afraid to get on the field of life and start playing, and all you did was hide. And you may not have that language, but you're going to feel that feeling when you see it. When someone posted on Instagram, you're going to be like, wow, we both left and started at the same time. I'm here still feeling sorry for myself. That guy did it and I didn't. And like that moment is where these thoughts of maybe I'm better off without me being here. Like that's where those thoughts get oxygen and start to grow a little bit, is when we see other people doing things that we then think we're not capable of.
Oh, sure. And it is. And if you don't, I think that's the hardest thing with veterans when you leave, is if you don't really have that exit strategy or what you're going, because in the military, that's what you're taught. This is your mission. go accomplish it. And you're pretty much always given your mission. I mean, it's not something you figure out most of the time. Here's your mission from your higher headquarters or your sergeant, your squad leader, your platoon leader, company commander, whoever it is giving out missions. Here's your mission. You go accomplish it. When you get out, nobody who's giving you the missions now. Nobody's giving you the missions to go do. And I know that's what's hard is I think that's why a lot of people come back on the reserve side is because now somebody's giving them missions again. It gets them from that one weekend to the next weekend each month. Like, this is what I'm going to do this next month. I have this training exercise, or I have to go to my unit. And I think that is really hard for veterans sometimes, is to all of a sudden, you love the life you're living it. And then now you have to go and give yourself the goals. You have to give yourself what I want to do. And like you said, it's kind of, the military does a great job of giving it to you from day one. So I know that that's a hard transition. So for me, I already had my mission, which was FinDec. So I had that always there, giving it to me on the personal side, the civilian side. So when I was completely coming out, I was stepping right into my next mission it's going to be ongoing until I retire, obviously, but it was there for me. So I think that did help me, because I know if again, my wife asked me, do I want to go back in? I don't want to go back in. I just miss the people. I miss my buddies. I miss all the people I worked with. But that, what I'm doing now is very fulfilling, because I'm helping and working with people just like I was in the military. So I'm leading people at my organization, which is what I love to do. So I think sometimes you have to, again, what I said when you asked the question at the very beginning of starting this podcast, is figure out what you enjoy. And I think sometimes people say, well, I enjoy the military. Well, that's just kind of what you do. But what do you enjoy what you do is it being a squad leader?
What would you do every day for free?
Yeah. Yeah. Or what part of military life do you like? If you were a pilot, you like to fly, well, then go, pilots are hurting in the civilian side, so that you can find a lot of meeting and come home and still do what you love, which is really flying. Or if it's a mechanic, you love working on vehicles. Well, you can easily come home and still do what you love and have meeting, just, be at home. And then you have a mission that you're working towards continuously, instead of, like you said, you comparing, because that comparing is a thief of life. And you do see it a lot with veterans, comparing it to the other ones or to people that are out at the same time. Why are they killing it? Or why are they doing this and I can't do this? Or why am I not able to do this? So
I'm interested, and I almost would take a guess as a yes, within the work you do at FinDec with financial, like freedom, designing what you want to leave behind, like your legacy. One thing that you probably see more often is what people really lack to even see a product like FinDec getting them somewhere, or any financial investing getting them somewhere. They lack perspective. And I'm curious, is there a common perspective that you run into a lot that people just aren't gathering or even getting in the process of life, or how they've set up their life to be able to see? Because the big thing with anything financial is it's removing the burden that money puts you into of being a slave to it. And so the more you can expand that, the more you can change your mindset around it, the more abundant life becomes, and you can start living well beyond what you think you can do right now. But that perspective isn't something that most people can see.
No. And so this is where I think military veterans have such an advantage over so many people in the world, is because when you serve, you're traveling not just our country, but the world, cultures, all these different places you're going, you're getting all these new perspectives about how people live, how people do things. And I would say that it was the military that gave me a lot more perspective than what I do now for FinDec, because I traveled the world. I went out, saw other places, other countries, other cultures, people, professions. And so when I came back and now I'm doing FinDec still, I have such a bigger perspective of how things work, and how, and using these different experiences that I had through the military to make it even better. And I think that's, you do see it, Ben. You see a lot of people that are, doing things, but they're very they're very limited in what their knowledge or experiences are. So that makes your options limited, because everything you do in life is based off your own personal perspectives and your experiences. So if you don't have a lot of different experiences in life, then most likely you're going to follow a more narrow path of how you do things, because that's all you know. So I think when you equate it to military veterans, especially when they come back, especially the veterans of the last 20 some years, with everything that's been going on in the world and the things that the military's had to do and go, there's so much advantage they have because they're coming back and they've seen different things. They've seen that they can that, and it's such an advantage to organizations to have that a part of your team. When organizations are looking to hire people and find people, they want people with all these different experiences and knowledge base, because it just makes them more valuable. Because it's like the military. When you're in the military and you're doing something, you don't know what's going to happen the next day. And so you have to use and I was in civilian law enforcement too for a while. So that's the same thing, is that going there and getting those experiences allows me now to how to run my business, because I have all these different experiences and perspectives. So I think, again, when the military, you come out of it and you come home, you think it's over because you're not in the military yet. It's actually just beginning, and you're going to use all this experience from the military to be even.
You're sitting at a powder keg. That's often how I describe it. Like, and your next objective is to find the fuse.
Yes,
because you have something that only 7% of the population has at any given time, and if you can unlock it, like, sky's the limit. But
it's amazing how that's so blinded because of that kind of drug you get from the military. It's just, or
even the guilt, maybe, like just the emotional baggage of you just want to run and leave behind everything, because then you just assess the entire thing was unvaluable and it was just a waste of your time. And then you discredit every lesson, every purpose, every friend that ever came into your life, or every friend that no longer is there. All you're doing is just pushing that away. And we recently had in the podcast last week, and he was talking about how he has tattoos on his arm of his 4 friends that are no longer here. And essentially, if he would have stopped running from those memories, or if he would have kept running from those memories, those guys would have never been remembered. He actually carries around a picture on the day that they died to let everybody know about this person. Like, he takes them, he rides in their truck, he goes to the gym with them, and like, those lessons and perspective is part of who he is. Like, he brings the character, the funniness, and all these different things these other people were into his life every day. And I think even just from financial freedom, like, you have so much value from all the people you run into, especially as we just talked about the reservist. I mean, how many people would just pay to have a conversation with a doctor to understand, like, what's it like to make $500,000 or $200,000 or whatever they make that time? Like, you would be hard pressed if we have a doctor have any spare time to give you any perspective on how they see the world. But here, 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year, you get a networking facility of all these different ways that other people have designed their lives that most of us probably have never even looked for. We just see it as, another weekend.
Well, and I think you have a podcast, you said you run for a couple of years. I'm in a business. My business is all about networking. I mean, you can't ask for the textbook definition of a business that needs a network than financial planning, financial retirement planning, because it's all about, when you're dealing with people's money, it's all about personal referrals, because money is such a personal thing to people. So they're not going to just open the yellow books, if that even exists now. But they're not going to open the yellow books and call John Smith at Financial Advisor and give them $1 million. So I think for military people, because you're in the military and you travel and you on active duty, you change units all the time. I mean, you're forced to. So you have such a large network that you can tap into even when you get out, that can help you through that transition to continue going. You're just going to do it differently, but you should be reaching out to them, like you said, not looking at your buddy that got out and is killing it, but calling them and saying, hey, how are you doing this? What have you been doing? And they might say, well, I did this. Like, oh, I know how to do that. I can do that. Well, that's easy. I think it's just, once you get out of the military environment where it's so controlled, you do forget you're an individual and that you have many skill sets and you're very strong. You just kind of have to take a little more of the leading role. And that's hard, I think, that's hard for anybody in general. But then when you are in the military, where the basis of being in the military is about the greater good, it's hard all of a sudden to think about yourself only first. I mean, that's what you're basically doing. So I got to think about myself first, and how do I take care of my family, myself, to keep going? And that's hard to do for anybody, let alone people that have grown up, have been in the military, because of the way it's structured, as you said. So I think your networking is and I still, to this day, I still have ex-soldiers that are still around that reach out to me for advice on planning. And
they updated that language, by the way. It's no longer ex-soldier, it's soldier for life.
Soldier for life.
They obsoleted the other version.
Yeah. Soldier for life will reach out to me, and I'm not even a licensed advisor. That's not what I do at my organization, but they'll still reach out to me and say, hey, Michael, this is what's going on, or what do you think? Or, and I'll say, we'll do this or do that. And these are Soldier for Life people that are no longer in, that are still reaching out to their network. So I think we just forget that sometimes, that you can still be a soldier for life, like you said, Ben, without being in the military. And I think it's like, for us, it's like either one or the other. Well, if I'm not in, I just can't be in. I can't. And I think you can still be in. Again, I'm using air quotes for our non-video. It's, you can be in. You're never not going to be a soldier once you're a soldier, but you just kind of have to adapt and change once you're not doing it full time anymore. And I think that's the difference. I don't think people realize that you're just adapting to a new mission, to a new way of life, but you're still using those same skill sets that were given to you, or that you enjoy, or that you are really good at, to keep that going.
And I was just talking to a new Air Force veteran. He's been out only 2 weeks, and he had a whole bunch of dreams and a bunch of ambitions, but he had ideas, but he lacked width. And so often, and he was just a 4-year active duty. So, I mean, like, he was just doing his time, and then he got out. And so in those types of mindset, you can see the world, but there's still a part of almost just American society where we don't seek out adventure, or we don't seek out that perspective. And one trick that I've recently been using, and it's been something I call now like designing your legacy. And sometimes there's a certain type of individual, I'm sure as I tell this, you're gonna be like, yes, I've seen many of those people, where the rut is so deep they can't see on left or right of the flank of actually where they could go. Even if you gave them permission to dream, they're like, I don't know, I see dirt. And the only difference between a rut and the grave is the depth. So, I mean, depending on how deep it is, you might not even be able to see the horizon, and you're like, all I see is grass clippings maybe. Well, one trick that, and I did it with him as well, is like giving them $1 million in their mind. And giving them $1 million to dream is like building scaffolding inside the ditch so that you can get a better perspective. Because it's almost so crushing sometimes when you're in that pit to even imagine how life could be different. But I always say, like, okay, I just transferred $1 million. What do you start doing with your time tomorrow? And some people have even a hard time with that. And sometimes they'll come up with like, oh, I would do all this traveling or all these things. And my favorite question to ask after they've dreamed up everything, and then what? And then what? And it just gives them this permission to move beyond the patterns of their life or that rut that they're stuck in. And to me, that's like the crux of what keeps veterans stuck. But then when a veteran can see where he can go, like, sky's the limit, and they just start running. And most times, like, we just don't have that hill to attack because we're still so deep in our rut. But one trick that I've learned is give them $1 million imaginatively, and almost instantly they'd be like, oh, I would start doing this. Well, then go fucking start doing that. Stop doing this over here, because that's going to light you up and change your life.
Yeah. And I think it's also, like you said, like, they stop at the first thing they say. Well, I'll just do this. Well, no. You can keep going. Oh, $1
million lasts quite a while.
Yeah.
And if you have a friend like Michael Lee in your life, it could actually last a lot longer.
It will go a long way, but you don't need to stop. It's like, you can do this while you're doing this, or you can try this out while you're doing this. I think the military is so linear, right? You go from one thing to the, it's like, I'm doing some volunteer work, and it's for a at-risk academy here in California for teens, but the National Guard runs it. So it's basic training, and I went there, and I remember talking to my wife after I came back, and I said, she's asked, well, how did it go? I said, it was good. It's like, got there because I had to do orientation. She's like, how was it? She thinks it's going to be this fun, orientation thing. I was like, no, it was kind of like, I got there, then I waited, then I got there and I waited for the next thing. And then I got there and waited for the next thing. And so I've done it, but she's like, really? I'm like, yeah, but that's just how the organization runs. It has for 200 plus years, and that's how it's successful. So it's hard for people to come out of that and then be like, oh, you can do this while you're waiting for this. It's like, you don't have to sit in this room and wait to be excused. You can actually start planning your next thing you want to do while you're waiting to be excused, or you can start working on this while you're working on this at the same time, and still have that $1 million growing for you. That's going to be there. I think it's just that kind of removing that linear part of life. And now it's more all over the place. You can bounce here, there, and you have a lot more flexibility. And so and it's hard, to embrace that. And, all this flexibility choices, like, hey, it's like you said, Ben, you have $1 million. What are you going to do?
I'm interested. We haven't spent much time there, but let's park here for a second. While we're on perspective, because it's been kind of a theme over the last week of been a lot of rants on perspective, and I've also just been talking to a lot of dads who need the perspective. How do you are helping your kids get perspective? What's your philosophy? What's your approach to make sure that your kids have enough perspective to figure out how they can plug into the world?
Well, I think, obviously my kids I have a 11, 10 and 8-year-olds. So they grew up these last couple of years in COVID, and that especially being in California where things were very different out here for us. They lost a lot of perspective over the last couple of years. Actually, they kind of forgot how the world works, how things happen, how things come about. So now I'm much more aggressive. I sit them down even at a young age and talk about a budget. I talk about, you make money and you got to make sure you make more money than what you spend so that you have money left over to do whatever you want to do and you have options. So I think, again, it's having those honest conversations with them. I think some people think you can't have honest conversations with kids, and you can. You just have to have within reason and make sure they understand at their level. But a budget's a pretty universal word. You can start using it because, kind of like in anything, if it's the perspective, right? So if they go through life and they're 18 years old, and all of a sudden they're 18 years old and they're out of high school, and then they have their place, and then they come to you, mom and dad, say, hey, well, what do I do? How do I pay for this? So we got to run a budget. Well, what's a budget? Well, they've never heard the word. So I think a lot of it is, when you're with kids, is you got to start telling them now about these things. You're probably not giving them concepts, but you're giving them terminologies and some things. And then you kind of just layer on it over time as they grow up. And then all of a sudden they're 18 years old, 19 years old, and they got their own place, and they know what a budget is, and they know they got to make more money than they spend for their place. That's a big head start in the world. So, I've seen, especially in our industry, or what we do, there's financial literacy is a really big problem in our country and in the world. People don't understand financial literacy, right? They understand they go to job and make a paycheck, but it goes back to your question, right? If you have $1 million, what are you going to do with it? Well, if you spend it all on traveling, well, if you park $100,000, spend the other $900,000, but you invest $100,000, you're going to make more money than the original $1 million that was given to you to keep spending.
You're probably going to get a good paycheck every month just from the interest. You don't have to do anything for a while.
But again, people don't realize that those little things, that can make a huge difference in your life and what you're going to do going forward, and give you so many more options, so much more. So when you get asked that question by Ben, you can say, well, Ben, with $1 million, I can do X, X, and X, and X. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, that's the whole purpose of it, is to maximize your resources. And so, our kids are, and obviously growing up in a military, or being a military person myself, being a soldier for life, I still kind of run my family like a unit, because that's not because that's just who I am. And that's it's one of those transitions and my family jokes about it. My kids all the time are saying, geez, Dad, you're like your little soldiers. And I'm like, but they are. And I think that's that transition, is you can still be your soldier for life and do the things that you found in that unit, but you make your family your unit now.
I'll give you one. I routinely just started doing this last year. I tell the kids ears when I want them to pay attention. And that's what they yell at you in boot camp, but it works. And they don't know any difference, but it gives me a little bit of humor, and it gets them attention, like ears, listen up and pay attention when I'm about ready to tell you. Because the crux of parenting is we often start talking to kids and their mind is 10 miles away and they're not listening. I want to go to one more spot that it ties to money. And I remember as an entrepreneur, it was such a unique feeling that when you get a check for whatever. I remember when I got my first $750 check for speaking for 2 hours of work, figuring out that money can come from nowhere, and it doesn't have to be issued, and that you can create it from nothing. That lesson is something that is extremely powerful as an entrepreneur. It's a lot of hard work and a lot of stress and anxiety not getting issued your money from a W-2 job. But that idea from having it as a kid is where I want to go. So I'm curious, have you incorporated any entrepreneurial, starting a business and realizing you can create an idea out of nothing? Even I just learned this yesterday. When it comes to ideas of there's still plenty of ideas out there. We put a man on the moon before we put wheels on a luggage suitcase. And so realizing that something as big as wheels on a suitcase was after putting a man on the moon. There's plenty of ideas out there. So I'm more curious, how do you incorporate like teaching them entrepreneur stuff of how to make money versus going to get it?
And you're speaking like what I teach to my kids?
Yeah.
Well, I think first is, teaching them that, of course, and then I grew up as a kid, I had chores, and my chores were not necessarily the standard chores. They were, physical labor chores that I would do, and you make a little money for my parents, and you put it in your piggy bank, and next thing you know, you're making your own money. So I think right now, the first thing we do is we establish that, you work and you make money. Because even what you're saying is you had to work to get that speaking engagement. You had to show initiative. You had to figure it out, go get it, perform, and then you're rewarded for doing that work. And so right now we're trying to teach them, like, if you go do this work, you're going to be rewarded for it. And that's the reward. It comes in that you earn this. This is yours and nobody else's, and nobody else can take it from you. And you created this. And then we established, well, with this, then you can go get X, X, and X. So you can go spend part of that $1 million that Ben's going to give you now because you're making it. Then once they establish that, hey, this is, I work and I will be rewarded. Now it's like, well, what can I go? We're starting to teach them is, what could you go do now that's even to create more of that reward? That's not something we're giving to you. And that's the entrepreneurial side of things. And my wife and I are both very entrepreneurial type people. We have our own businesses. We like creating businesses. We like creating things. And like you said, it's a lot of work. It's hard, but it gives you a lot more financial freedom, flexibility, it's in your control. So that we tell them, if you fail, it's because either you can't blame it on somebody else, you failed. But that's how you learn to be better the next time.
Yeah, so you only really fail when you quit. As long as you didn't fail, you're learning.
Yeah. And when I always say the only way you ever learn is by failing anyways. The only way you really learn to do something really well is you got to fail at it first. Because I don't really know too many people that jump into something and there's like geniuses. There are people like that, but it's very hard to come by. So you have to actually, we kind of make them fail. We say, hey, you just didn't do it right, but what didn't you do right, or what went wrong? And the next time do it even better. And the next thing, you're becoming an expert at something, or you're learning how to do something even better. But you're right, Ben, the only thing you do is you quit. That's when you really fail. But when you don't do something right or something doesn't work out, that's life. That's normal part of life, is when things don't work out. Sometimes things don't work and they're completely out of your control. And that's normal. That's part of life. And I think the military does a good job at training us and teaching us that and showing us that. So when you come back from the military, I was pretty adaptable. And I wasn't like that before I went into the military. I was very rigid. Everything had to go a certain way. And if it didn't, I gave up. I was like, well, it just didn't go my way. It wasn't until I went to the military, and the military gets kind of, I think, well, everybody's rigid. And the military is actually they teach you have to be really adaptable and flexible, because most of the time you're going against another enemy that doesn't care about you, or they're not going to do it the way you want it. So when you come out, you're like, I was like, wow, it's, you just gotta go with it. You gotta be flexible. You gotta be able to change. You gotta be able to learn on the fly. And then, so those are, but I think it starts with just the kids, like our kids. We just say, hey, you gotta do some chores, and this is what you do. And it's a job. So they understand the concept of a job. I mean, a lot of people, I don't think, under a concept of a job or a profession. I think that's also kind of lost. Our kids are like, oh, this is your profession, or this is what you do. And it's like, yeah, this is what we do for a living. This is how we make a living, and this is how we do it. And so we try to teach them those kind of concepts. And we know they probably don't fully understand it right now, especially our youngest son, but he does know. It's like he came back from school yesterday, came home, ran up into my office in here and said, hey, how's it going? How was work today, Dad? So he understands that I'm working and doing stuff. And I think that's a huge step into saying, oh, we just have all this stuff because we just have it. So.
And I think it's a reminder that you don't win instantly. And I've adopted, especially Corona, and as a stay-at-home dad, I learned this, is it's not about getting every win. It's not about even like correcting every behavior. It's really parenting to the curve towards a direction that you want. Even investing. I mean, not every month is a good day in the market, but you're essentially investing to the curve of everybody generally over 30 years gets 8%. Not every day is 8%, but on average, you're going to get the 8%. And I think we often look for perfection and miss it in that you don't get everything right. You just reinforce over and over and over again. And eventually there's those days where they like, wow, that took 3 years and now they just got it. But now they know it and now they can do something with it.
Well, sure. I mean, investing, we tell all our clients, it's not a sprint, it is a marathon. And you're planning probably for 30, 40 years from now when you're starting your financial planning, or you should be. And it's going to have a lot of ups and downs. There's going to be some bad days. There's going to be some good days. Like right now, it's if you're looking at the stock market, you're thinking it's like, I'm never going to retire, but this is just a small blimp in your life. This is only a small period of over those 40 to 50 years. And I think it's hard. But we talked about this in the kind of earlier on the show. Your show is about perspective. So if you have some perspective in life, realizing things go on for a long time, things can change very quickly. When these moments come up, you're able to deal with them a lot better instead of being like, why quit? Or I'm not going to do this anymore because it's not working the way I want it to. So then you're like, well, no, this is just what happens. I'm going to adapt. So maybe this is a great time to actually get into the market because everything is cheaper on the market for pricing. So this is when you want to be aggressive right now. So those are the things that if you're adaptable and have good perspective, you will be able to, like you compared both the people getting out at the same time and how they're killing it. Maybe they're killing it because they're just, being aggressive, or they're trying to, get the edge on everybody else instead of just saying, well, I wish I was still doing this, or I wish I was still there. And that I'm stuck in that, 10 years ago, where I was, instead of like, where am I want to go, where I want to get to, how I want to spend that $1 million, make it last forever.
One of my favorite stories on perspective is the story of Plato. So there was this guy, after World War II, everybody switched to propane from coal heating their house. And so this wallpaper cleaner to get rid of the ash out of the walls was no longer needed. And so this guy was like 3 or 4 days from closing shop. And this teacher friend he had saw this byproduct that he was of the process of creating this cleaner for the wallpaper. And she's like, this stuff is amazing. My kids in the classroom would really love it. That byproduct, 3 days away from failure, became the $1 billion business we have today. Is Plato. So the perspective that I learned from it was, you never know, even at the last day of like, it's almost over, 3-degree course correction, boom, $1 billion.
And I think because you're talking to military veterans on your show, that's a skill set that most people don't have, is that adaptability, the flexibility to be able to adjust.
Yeah. Oh, you mean we can't go up that hill? We got to go over this one? Okay. Regroup.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I think it's like there's all these skill sets that the veterans have that they forget as soon as they get out. They think they don't exist anymore. Like they're gone, like they're taken away, because a lot of things in the military is given to you, you're told what you're going to do. And they can't take those abilities away once you have them, and they become such a powerful tool. And you have such a leg up on the rest of the civilian world because they don't have all the perspectives you have. They didn't have to have a choice to say, well, you got to get up the hill. I don't care how you get up there. You get up it. And most of the civilian people are like, well, you got to get up the hill. Like, well, I don't care. I'll just go do something else then. I give up. But for military people, it's like, nope, we got to go conquer it. So this is now, we're going to go this way. So I think it's I just think they forget that it's there, that it's not removed when you retire or get out or no longer doing it full time. It's just, you're not, again, it's something individually in you that you can still use. And I use it at FinDec. That's why I said earlier, people always say you can tell how much the military gave you. My father says this, who was in the military for a long time. He says he can see all these things I got from the military that I'm using now on the civilian side. And so I didn't give them up. I just gave up the being gone part. And I think that's, that I had to figure that part out. That's what I didn't realize I was giving up at first. I thought I was giving up everything. And I realized all I was doing is giving up being away from home. And I still have the fulfillment that I had in the military now.
The crazy part, I figured this out, I think last year sometime. The military ethos is train with your allies, train to the edge of your skill level, fail together, and grow. If that is not the philosophy we need to apply on the other side of being a veteran, I don't know what is, because training with your allies, getting to the point where you fail, like you reach your peak, but then realizing you can grow to a new peak, like the answer is right within the ethos of how the military operates, trains, and grows. But yet no one really incorporates that as an ethos for our life going forward.
No, it's well, and like you said, what 6% of the population our country serves. So the other 90+%, you're kind of overruled, majority rules type thing where you don't get to, and you tell somebody that and they'll look at you probably crazy eyed thinking like, what are you talking about, man? Like, huh?
Yeah.
But I think that's where veterans can be so much more active out there to bring that to the rest of the population, because that's what makes the military so successful and the best in the world. And I think that's where the messaging is lost, is like, don't stop being, you're never not a soldier once you are, you're just doing it for a different unit, which is no longer called units, or called companies or corporations or businesses, but you're still working with an organization, a unit, to accomplish a mission. And you need those skill sets and ethos to be successful. So, and I think I wish more people would in the military come and do that. And next thing you know, that transition's easy because you're still doing what you love and being around the people you like.
Applying the same process of life. Like you're not alone.
No, you're not. You're not alone at all.
Well, Michael, I really appreciate this time and talking about, we didn't get a chance to talk much about being a dad until the very end there, but we went into a lot of great areas. So if people want to get connected more with FinDec or get connected with you directly, where's the best place people could go?
They can go to our website, www.findec.com. That's FINDEC.com. Go there, and then you can reach out to me or to anybody. I just say, being in the military, I was a commander, so I was a big believer in that open door policy. So I have it everywhere I go with people. If you need, then that's that networking. We talked about it, sharing it with the veterans, is use that network to your advantage, because that's why we're here, for each other. So even if it's non-financial related, it's just a veteran to veteran question, you're transitioning or whatever it is, reach out to that network. If it's not me, build that network and start to create that network for you that's going to carry on to your next phase of life.
Well, again, Michael, thank you for coming on the podcast today, and I look forward to the next time, because I'm positive this friendship is just getting started.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate all your time today, Ben. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that episode, as always, delivered on the mark and got you thinking new thoughts, believing in yourself in new ways, and giving you a path to hopefully step in to be the dad that you want to be tomorrow. I know that episode left a mark on me, and that is why you're here, to listen to what exactly that episode did for me and how it changed my thinking. Never interviewing a reservist in this particular way. I've interviewed reservists, but I've never dove into the idea of how many different types of people, if you are in the reserves, you actually meet, because these are people living two lives. They come into the military twice a week, or 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. Sorry, gotta get it right there. And they meet people from all walks of life, doing life in so many different ways. And I've never considered how much perspective that a reservist would have over someone who served active duty. And often, I don't even know if a reservist truly sees the perspective and the opportunity to have so many conversations with people at so many different walks of life, and essentially go to the central spoke of a central life. If you think of life as a wheel, you're going to the central spoke when you go to your reserve duty, and all these people have lives on the outside of the spoke, but you all get to see each other and understand where they are at on the outside of the spoke, and it's very difficult to see from one end to the other on a spoke until you go to the middle, and then you can see all of it. So that was my big takeaway, is understanding the perspective that a reservist can bring to their transition to life, and also just helping other people figure out how to live life, because they have a perspective, just like I said, that is unique. And while serving on active duty, we have an also perspective that we see the world generally. We travel the world, we get deployed, we get moved around a lot. But how often are we interacting with people at different levels of the world? How many potentially business owners are we connecting with on active duty? How many potential doctors are we connecting with on active duty? Generally, very few. So that was my big takeaway. And if you're a reservist, I hope that you really harnessed that idea. Or if you were a reservist, think back to maybe that perspective that you haven't yet capitalized on, and see what you can do with it in your life. If you got value out of this episode, one favor I could ask, is go over to iTunes if you're on an iPhone and leave an iTunes rating review. Open up that purple podcast icon, click Military Veteran Dad, scroll all the way to the bottom. There is a button that says write a review. Love to read every one of those. They mean the world to me, and They help validate the people searching on Apple Podcasts for new and exciting podcasts to listen to. Those reviews, your value that you got out of this episode means the world to me and to other people that are looking for Apple Podcasts. If there is ever anything that I can do, let me know. If there's an episode that you need, if there's a conversation that you feel is missing, let me know. Ben@militaryveterandad.com. I'm always an open book. I'm always willing to answer questions, dive in, or even hop on a phone call. You can head over to bencloy.com, and up in the right-hand corner, there is a Design Your Legacy free call, because legacy is the one thing we talk about in this podcast the most. Your family is your legacy, and it's one thing we often don't design with intentionality until it's often too late, or we realize, like, you know what, there's a fork in the road a few years ago. I didn't realize it was a fork. So, bencloy.com, upper right-hand corner, or if you want to just drop me an email, ben@militaryveterandad.com. Guys, that is it we have for you this week. Have an amazing week, and I'll be back again with you guys for another episode on Monday.